Rev up your engines!
Well, if you're a Toyota Land Cruiser fan, you're going to be sad. They're not going to be making the Land Cruiser after 2021, says Toyota. People that have those vehicles, they love them. And of course, they've been changing over time. I had customers ages ago, they had the Land Cruisers when they had the old carburetor and they had standard transmissions. Well, for a long time, they haven't even offered a standard transmission in the United States, only automatic transmissions. So basically, they're not making them as off-road vehicles in the United States anymore. They're just big old giant SUVs for people to drive around in. And being that big, they're tremendous gas hogs. Anybody who's ever owned one, I have many customers with them, and they love them, except when I say, well, what kind of gas mileage you get? And they said, we never checked because it would be too depressing because it uses so much fuel. If you don't mind it, you can go ahead with it. But Toyota, of course, has to have corporate fuel gas ratings for fuel mileage ratings for the United States and for the rest of the world, too. It's a big deal. And that lowered their corporate fuel mileage, so that's really one of the reasons that they're dumping it with the big old V8 engine in it. Some people surmise that, well, they said they're going to make the last one 2021, but maybe they're working on something for later, just like they stopped making Toyota Venzas. Now they're making them again. What's in a name? It's just that big, gigantic vehicles with huge V8 engines that get horrendous gas mileage. They're not going to be the most popular vehicles. And if they don't sell that many of them, it doesn't make any sense for them to build them because, after all, it's a company that's out to make a profit. It doesn't make sense to make something that, if it gives them a bad image because it's a gas hog, and they don't sell that many of them anyway, it really doesn't make a matter. Like GM with Hummer. They stopped making Hummers after they went bankrupt. The government said, you got to make a profit now, and so they cut the Hummers because they weren't making much money on them. They never sold that many of them. Turns out they lost millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars over the years they produced them, or what it cost and what they got paid for the vehicles. So that's the first thing that they hacked. I'm sure Toyota's not losing money, but there's lots of reasons behind it. Not going to be able to buy a new one after 2021. So if you're a fan of them, go out and buy one this year. Dr. Scott says, is a Ford Flex a good mechanical vehicle? They're out of production. Dealers are still charging a premium price for a car that's 2 years out of production. I like the large cargo and the squareness. Is it okay? I'm also thinking about a Nissan van. Well, I wouldn't get Nissan. Nissan's quality isn't all that great. Now, the Ford Flexes, yeah, they were decent vehicles. They weren't great vehicles. They were decent vehicles. You might look at some of the other cargo vans out there if you really want a vanny type thing, You can't beat the Toyota vans. A lot of workmen do that, and that thing's going to last forever, And if you're thinking about something you want to last for a long time, I wouldn't buy the Flex. If you could find a good deal, I don't know why they're asking so much money. This kind of stuff is absurd because when things are out of production, the prices should always go down, but I guess they're just trying to get rid of them all, and they want their regular price, and they're going to stick to their guns, and maybe they'll sell them, maybe they won't. They seem to have a lot of them at the dealers around here that nobody's buying. You might be better off getting like a Toyota Sienna van, cutting it and using that if you want that kind of space, and you're going to get, 300,000 miles or more out of that, which you'd never get out of the Flex. Heart of Morgan said, my antifreeze color is still rusty looking after I flushed and put new coolant in. Why? Here's the thing. Rust is tiny, 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 tiny. You could never get all the little rust particles out if it was rusty after you flush it out. That's just a fact of life. If you wanted to get that out, you'd have to take the engine apart, steam clean all the passageways inside the engine. It would be ridiculous. The little bit, if you did a good job flushing, a little bit isn't going to hurt anything because you put new coolant in. The new coolant has anti-rust inhibitors. What will happen is, what little pieces you have, and will just float around, they won't hurt anything. And they won't start multiplying like a virus in your system because the new antifreeze has anti-rust inhibitors in it. So don't worry about it. You'll never get it perfectly clean if the vehicle was extremely rusty. On the other hand, it won't hurt anything. Just go by years. Let's say you bought new 5-year coolant. Write it down. Then change it again in another 5 years. It won't hurt anything. DGA Barnett says, I got a 2007 GMC Acadia. It won't start after the ignition switch replaced. You replace the ignition switch in a modern car. That's part of the anti-theft system. You will then have to have it reprogrammed by somebody who knows what they're doing so that it'll go with the anti-theft system, because if you don't, it'll do exactly what your vehicle's doing. It will not start. You can't really do this stuff yourself because you need the equipment. Sometimes even mechanics like me can't do it because they'll only give the information to reprogram it either to bonded locksmiths, of which I am not, or dealer mechanics because they want to have the dealerships make all the money selling the parts and fixing the cars for you. You want to start there. You might check locksmiths in your area. A lot of locksmiths now have the equipment to reprogram those things. And if they do, they're going to charge a lot less than a dealership mechanic is going to charge you. So start there. Find a good locksmith and reprogram it. Plus, if it won't start now, guess what? Towing a car costs you maybe $150, $200, right? Locksmiths make house calls. They make a house call. Maybe they'll charge you $50 for a house call. Beat spending $150, $200 for a tow job to a place that's going to charge more money anyway. Corey G. Tennessee says, I got 2002 Grand Cherokee. It throws all 4 oxygen sensor heater circuit codes at the same time. The fuse is intact. What could be wrong? Odds are you don't have 4 bad oxygen sensors. They don't go bad at the same time. The heater circuit heats them up fast so they work at premium efficiency as fast as possible. The old ones didn't. You start up the car for the first minute and a half, they weren't efficient. So they put this computer crap in to heat them up. Odds are you either got a wiring problem or more often you got a computer problem because the computer is what sends the impulses to turn the heaters on. And obviously, none of them are being turned on. You probably have a computer failure and you did say it was a Grand Cherokee. They are notorious for having computer failure. You do want to hire a mechanic to check it first. Just don't go buy a computer because if you got a wiring short that made the computer go bad, guess what happens when you put that expensive new computer? It will short that out and you'll be right back where you started from. Have a mechanic check it out for wiring shorts first. Maybe you could get lucky and you find a wiring short and it didn't damage the computer and you can fix it. But more likely is if there is a short, it fried the computer. And putting a new computer in will be fried again, so you got to make sure there's no shorts before you start messing with that stuff. You called yourself Corey G. Tennessee. If you live where they don't inspect cars and it runs okay, you can live without it. I have many customers with Toyotas that live with it. The oxygen sensors work fine, but the heater system doesn't. So it takes them a minute to warm up before they start working correctly. Who cares what happens the first minute you drive your car? Unless you're in a place where it's inspected and it won't pass the emission inspection, you could just live with that whole thing. GBA Connecticut says, hey Scotty, I'm an on-demand courier. I drive 400 miles a day. I took your advice. I didn't sell my front-wheel drive '04 Honda CR-V with 192,000 miles and have turned it into a lean, mean, gas-sipping delivery machine. If I create a switch to kill 2 of the fuel injectors when the car is sitting at a light or coasting, will it damage the engine? Don't do that because if you turn the fuel injectors off, they're still going to be getting spark. Things are going to run lean. You run lean, it can damage the engine. Don't do that. That kind of stuff has to be done by computers in milliseconds. And then they change the timing. There's all kinds of things. And even when they're manufactured that way, look at the problems that General Motors has with those variable engines that are, V2468. And they found that the ones that did the disabled cylinders ended up wearing because of lubrication problems, because of the way it runs when they're not firing. Don't do it. Leave it the way it is. It's a perfectly good, well-running Honda, and they can last a really long time. I got a customer, the one that's got 380,000 miles on it, and you only got 192,000. So just leave it the way it is and don't mess up that engine by doing some modifications that you're going a little bit too far. Foxbrain says, I just bought an Auto fuel injector cleaner. Looking at the airport, we put the air in, I can't find an adapter that fits it. I also tried taking the current plug off. What can I do? That's some wonky Chinese, I know the Autos are made in China, that's a wonky Chinese air adapter where your airline fits in. But I'm looking at the thread, and to me the thread looks like normal pipe thread. All the ones I've seen are always normal pipe thread. You got to take it apart, and I noticed the fitting itself has a nut built in, so you can get a wrench on that. And then the part that it's going into looks like it has a nut, you can get a wrench on. If it doesn't have a nut, get a big pair of vice grips, clamp that on, and then put it on the ground. Hold, if you don't have a vice. If you have a vice, put it in a vice, that's easier. But if you don't have a vice, put it on the ground with like the vice grips on one side on the ground, and then with the wrench up in the air a little, and then whack it with a hammer, a big sledgehammer, and that'll break it loose. You'll be able to take it apart. I can look at the picture, it does come apart. It might have some kind of cement gluing it in, but you can always break it when you hit it with a hammer with a couple of wrenches on the ground. And of course, if you do have a vice, just stick the whole thing in a vice, and then it's tight in a vice, and then you can just put the wrench on and take the fitting off. I've done that a zillion times. But yeah, the Chinese use some weird fittings, and you just want to get like a Milton fitting, whatever, so it'll fit on your airline. And it'll have the same thread that screws into the device. It's just that the part where your air hose goes on, that's just some squirrely thing. Tanago says, I got a mechanical spring-loaded brake pressure regulator in my old-time car. It squeaks. Should I grease it or change the regulator? Whether it's working or not, I don't know. Can it go bad? I'm almost sure it's the original. It hasn't been touched for over 35 years. Start logically here. Okay, it's 35 years. Hasn't been used. Hasn't been touched. It's old. First, check to see if you can get a new one. If you can't, lubricate it. Leave it alone. But if you can get one and replace it for safety alone. They're that old, they can go bad, and then you get in a wreck. If something's that old, then you can get a new one, get it, and replace it. And what you want to do is, if lines are are rusty, spray them with WD-40 and let them soak for 3 or 4 days, and spray them again, let them soak another 3 or 4 days, so then when you take it apart, they'll come apart easier, and they won't break when you get all the fittings off of them, which often will happen if you don't get them nice and lubricated. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.